So, does anyone care to touch on this further?
According to a 2024 analysis from the National Caucus of Environmental Legislators, only 8 states plus Puerto Rico require the designation of critical habitats under their laws to protect endangered species. Hey guys, gals, and my non-binary pals, I'm Jerry. I left MAGA, and I've got some more news coming to you out of the Missouri Independent, but this is on a federal level. The feds no longer protect endangered species habitat. States say they can't pick up the slack. So, what do we got going on over here? The Trump administration is removing protections from the key places where endangered species live, saying states can keep the areas safe. But experts say states aren't equipped for the task, and that's very true. Earlier this month, the Trump administration finalized a major change to the Endangered Species Act, rolling back protections for the forest, wetlands, deserts, and other critical habitats that many plants and animals rely on. This is all side effect of Project 2025. The new rule will open many landscapes to development, logging and mining, and gas drilling. Wildlife officials in both conservative and liberal states had expressed strong concerns about the proposal, saying it would threaten their plans to safeguard endangered species. But federal officials framed the decision as a move to give quote unquote freedom to state leaders to manage wildlife without burdensome federal regulations. Okay, so I got to interject on this because here in the state of Missouri, uh, our car salesman of the governor, literally car salesman governor, um, decided along the way, or some of his people had decided along the way, and he didn't curb it. But the state is not going to take active measures to maintain the white-tailed deer population in the state of Missouri, even though there's this white nose fungus or virus going around. Or I'm sorry, that's bats. Wasting disease is with the white-tailed deer. And wasting disease can jump that barrier between animals, wild animals, and humans. But the Kehoe administration is depending on hunters and to thin the herd. But I know some dipsticks out there. I know some characters, especially down there in southern Missouri, down there in the hills. They don't care. It's meat to them. They don't care that the disease can jump the barrier. Anyway, so giving the state leaders the freedom to manage the wildlife, and then a governor decides to turn around and our state official turns around and doesn't do it. Anyway, back to the article. States that wish to continue protecting habitats can do so under state law. The Interior Department and other federal agencies wrote in their lengthy new regulations, and there's a link there. So, of course, I lined up the tab. To give you an idea, it's over here at the Federal Register. No, I haven't read it. Yes, you can go read it. The link is in the article. The article will be linked in the description. But in the summary, it says we, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the National Marine Fisheries Service, collectively referred to as the services, rescind the regulatory definition of harm in our Endangered Species Act regulations. This rescission removes the regulatory definition of harm from the Code of Federal Regulations in Title 50, Parts 17 and 222. So if you can't define harm, if you just rewrite the dictionary, it's so very 1984. The Newspeak Dictionary. What are we on, the edition 25 now? Oh, no, I guess it would be edition 47, wouldn't it? Anyway, um, but legal experts and wildlife. Back to the article. Sorry. Let me close that tab up there. Back to the article. But legal experts and wildlife veterans say that almost no states have endangered species laws on the books that allow state officials to prevent habitat destruction in the name of saving wildlife. I don't know if you guys remember back in the day, but Rush Limbaugh used to make quite the deal about the spotted owl and how they could find their habitat even in a Kmart sign. It doesn't. It's not supposed to work like that, people. It's not supposed to work like that. And yes, unfortunately, the regulations are not written in a way that state officials can prevent habitat destruction because um, investment bankers and real estate developers. We haven't heard about any of those in our government lately, have we? Federal level, anyway. All right, back to the article. While many states have laws to stop poaching and direct killing of wildlife, the protection of nesting areas, spawning streams, and other resources has long fallen to the Federal Endangered Species Act and the agencies that enforce it. Quote, it's not going to be a situation where the states can easily just jump in here and fill the void, end quote, said Robert Anderson, who served as solicitor for the Department of the Interior during the Biden administration. He continues saying, it's not going to help states and it's going to make it worse for the species, end quote. Now, I want to interject in here that not only is the Trump administration throwing this responsibility at the states, but let's not forget what they did with Roe v. Wade and the states can decide, right? They're throwing a lot of responsibility back at the states that are not prepared for these things. This is horrible. Back to the article. Many wildlife experts also noted that state wildlife agencies are already underfunded as it is. So true. Taking on taking on the massive regulatory system that prevents developers and extractive industries from destroying critical habitat would require far more resources than those agencies have available. And I'm going to invoke AI data centers at this point, all right? And the fact that the regulations are lagging the technology and they're popping up everywhere. They're destroying critical habitat. They're destroying habitat for humans as well as for wildlife. Anyway, a coalition of environmental groups and tribal nations have filed lawsuits challenging the federal rollback. The harm, or the harm rule. On July 10, the federal departments of Interior and Commerce announced they had finalized a rule rescinding the long-standing definition of harm under the Endangered Species Act. For decades, federal officials have scrutinized logging projects that would cut old-growth trees where owls built their nests and agriculture operations that diverted water from streams where salmon returned to spawn. So yeah, owls, spotted owls. Back to the article. But now the feds are pivoting to a much more limited definition of harm. Only actions that directly injure or kill the animals themselves will be considered a violation of the endangered species law. Yeah, great response, great reaction there, sweetheart. Oh my God. Um, how is destroying their habitat not directly causing the death of the animal? Is that the same sort of logic that they use when bombing a school over in Iran? I'm just wondering. Oh, anyway, good Lord, I've got to get back on track. Back to the article. Uh, Quote, you can destroy the resources a species requires as long as you don't do it when the species is at home, end quote, said Kerrigan Bork, a law professor and director of the Center for Watershed Sciences at UC Davis Institute of the Environment. Quote, if you drain a salmon river during the summer when the salmon aren't in it, ultimately it has the same impact of killing off the whole species, end quote. Yes, exactly. Oh, God. In its announcement, the Trump administration framed the move as restoring the original intent of the Endangered Species Act and reducing regulations that punish people for, quote, indirect or speculative impacts, end quote, to wildlife. The Interior Department did not respond to state line interview requests. Of course they didn't. A 2019 a 2019 study published the conservative science. Let me try that whole sentence again. I'm agitated, and so the dyslexia is kicking in. Sorry. A 2019 study published in Conservation Science and Practice of Species added to the list of endangered species from 1975 to 2017 found that only 17% of them faced threats of direct killing, while 81% faced habitat loss. All right, so that's in blue. So there's a link to the study, and there's the study. Temporal analysis of threats causing species endangerment in the United States. All right, so I don't even want to read the abstract. That's way too long. But understanding temporal variations of threats that cause species endangerment is a key to understand conservation strategies needed to improve species recovery. That's the first sentence. That should be all. Should be all that needs to be said. Back to the article. Quote: It's common sense that we can't save a species unless we save the places that they live. End quote. Said Jane Davenport, senior attorney at Defenders of Wildlife, a nonprofit conservation group that is planning to sue the federal government over the change. Quote, continuing, quote, this is an attempted death blow to the Endangered Species Act, end quote. Yes, exactly. And I don't remember this being directly targeted in Project 2025, but this is part of that whole deregulation process that is directly addressed in Project 2025. This is part of that environmental package that or environmental deregulation package in the Project 2025. Anyway, back to the article. Some industry groups praised the move. Of course, they did. The American Petroleum Institute and other oil and gas groups said in public comments that they supported the effort to limit habitat protections, but expressed concern that the Trump administration's move to rescind the harm definition without issuing a new interpretation would allow a future president or the courts to issue a more expansive reading of the law. Oh shit. So the big boys aren't happy that they rescinded the definition without replacing it, allowing for a potentially much more liberal interpretation of the word harm, a more accurate definition. See, that's a common problem with these Republican types is that they don't tend to think things all the way through to their logical conclusion. That's why when banning books for explicit content, a couple of Texas school districts, and this has happened repeatedly, have actually pulled Bibles off of school library shelves. Anyway, back to the article. The groups cited Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia's dissenting opinion in a landmark 1995 case that upheld habitat protections under the Endangered Species Act. Quote, harm must involve a direct injury to a particular animal, end quote, the groups wrote, arguing that it, quote, cannot result indirectly from habitat modifications, nor can the term apply to a population of animals, end quote. Yo, dude, here, I got it. I got a parallel for you. How about I come over there and just like rip the roof right off of your house and see how well you adapt to that? Maybe knock out the windows and take the doors off the hinges. Yeah, yeah. Okay, so back to the article. That was just They just popped into my head. I'm kind of agitated today. Back to the article. The state's role. In public comments after the rule was initially proposed, wildlife agency leaders from both liberal and conservative states said the change would be a blow to their conservation efforts. The proposed rule would have, quote, dire consequences, end quote, wrote Bruce Kreft, chief of the Conservation and Communications Division of the North Dakota Game and Fish Department. Quote, eliminating habitat protection will lead to further population declines and ultimately an increase in the number of species needing Endangered Species Act protection, end quote. Yeah, I could say the same thing about humans, right? Back to the article. Wildlife officials in Arizona, Georgia, Louisiana, New Mexico, New Jersey, Vermont, and Wyoming also expressed concern about the loss of habitat protections, as did the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, a nonprofit that represents state wildlife managers. Of the public comments reviewed by State Line, only Alaska's Wildlife Agency leader offered wholehearted support for the change. In response to those concerns, federal officials wrote in their rulemaking decision that the change, quote, does not alter the ability of the state to implement their own conservation programs or to regulate habitat impacts under state law, end quote. But the states don't have the financial regulations. And okay, so Missouri is making moves to get rid of payroll income tax in favor of a flat tax, which can be arbitrarily changed without populist consent by our governing body in Jefferson City. That in and of itself will disproportionately affect the financially disadvantaged, and by doing that, you're just Missouri is destroying its coffers. It's destroying its financial its ability, fiduciary ability to function, uh, and so and then try to absorb all this other stuff. It's oh um hmm. Back to the article. The wildlife experts say states cannot replicate the habitat protections that federal law provided. Although most states have their own state level endangered species laws, they're largely focused on poaching or direct killing of animals. Yeah, like here in Missouri. Quote, back to the article. Quote, the state level endangered species acts are wildly variable in what they're supposed to cover and are uniformly under resourced and under enforced because the Federal Endangered Species Act has been the real baseline since the 1970s, end quote, said Bork of UC Davis, or the UC Davis professor. Chris Servhain, who served as grizzly bear recovery coordinator for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for 35 years, worked closely with state wildlife agencies in that position. Grizzly bear recovery coordinator for the U.S. Fish. I think this guy probably knows a thing or two. Um, let's see, what did he say here? Quote, it's really disingenuous to say if states want to protect habitat, they can do so. That's not their role. That's not what they do. States manage the take or killing of animals directly related to hunting or trapping or something like that. The federal agencies manage the land base, end quote. Yes. Again, why would I try to argue with the guy? According to a 2024 analysis from the National Caucus of Environmental Legislators, only 8 states plus Puerto Rico require the designation of critical habitats under their laws to protect endangered species. So we have the link here to that 2024 analysis. National Caucus for Environmental Legislators. Natural Legacy for the Future. And that's a 180-page report. So the link is there in the article. So it will not be in the description. California, back to the article. California appears to be the only state with a process under state law to account for damage to wildlife habitat and require developers to offset those impacts, such as funding a restoration project nearby, said Becca Madsen, Restoration Economy Director with the Environmental Protection Innovation Center, or I'm sorry, Environmental Policy Innovation Center. Quote, states don't have this layer of federal regulations and staff and consistency of how it's been regulated for decades, she said. Continuing, now they've got to create their own processes and permitting and data and guidance. It's a lot, end quote. Even if the states were to pass laws and invest in programs to protect wildlife habitat, they would be unable to enforce those measures on federal land. Across the West, federal public lands cover vast swaths of many states and provide critical habitat for many species. If the U.S. Forest Service were to permit a logging operation on old growth forest under the new harm definition, state wildlife officials could do nothing to stop it. Meanwhile, some advocates are doubtful that the state lawmakers have any appetite to take on the regulatory role once handled by the feds. Quote, most state regulators are pretty strongly captured by the development and real estate interests, end quote, said Katie Grotenzinger. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Communications director with the Center for Western Priorities, a conservation group. Continuing with, the political bar to putting something like this in place at the state level is a lot higher than it was when the Endangered Species Act was passed. End quote. Going to court. Last week, a coalition of environmental groups filed a lawsuit challenging the harm rule. And I'm going to go ahead and stop because then there's two links in this paragraph. So let's take a look at this first link about the lawsuit challenging the harm rule. It's 46 pages long. There's all the official documentation markers that I would expect to find. No, I haven't looked at it. But for 50 years, common sense, biological science, and federal law have agreed on an overarching concept and the protection of fish and wildlife. Any activity that destroys the habitat where imperiled fish and wildlife shelter, sleep, feed, or raise their young, just as plainly destroys the species itself. That's the first sentence in the introduction. So that's available. All right, so continuing with this paragraph. A pair of tribes in Washington state filed their own lawsuit asserting that the decision will infringe on tribal fisheries that the federal government is obligated to protect under treaty agreements. Yeah, okay, so I got thoughts and feels on that. I have an old video that I'll try to remember to link in the description. Anyway, yeah, this is the Swinomish and the Saxon tribes. Anyway, it's all right there. The link is in the article. So back to the article. Some legal experts expect a flood of lawsuits over specific proposed projects. Quote, courts are going to have to figure out on a case-by-case basis what's covered and what's not covered, end quote, said Bork, the UC Davis professor. Continuing, it's going to lead to widespread confusion over the next decades over what's illegal or legal, and it's going to make it harder for developers and landowners to know whether they have liability or not, end quote. Some advocates expressed concern that the lawsuits challenging the Trump administration could make it to the conservative Supreme Court, which could then permanently enshrine an interpretation of the Endangered Species Act that fails to protect habitat. That would leave a future administration powerless to undo the change unless Congress were to rewrite the law. But some see no real alternatives. Quote, I'd be worried if it got to the Supreme Court, but the alternative is just acquiescence, which I don't think is a good idea, end quote, said Anderson, the former Interior Solicitor. I have a video that I did several, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago now. Maybe it's not been that long, about my perception of the Native American reservations being nothing more than cattle ranches. I got a real thorn in my side about Andrew Jackson and the Indian Removal Act and the fallout from that. And so what I'll do is along with the link to this article that I just read out, I will include a link to that video as well. It's on my YouTube channel, but I'll make it easier for you to find by including the link in the description. I hope that you've made it to the end of the video. If you have, it means that you've got some interest in what I had to say. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to the channel. And if you like the video, give it a thumbs up. Don't be afraid to share it with somebody you think might be interested in it or could use this information. Until the next video, please take care of yourself so you can help take care of others. Get the rest you need, drink plenty of fluids, and please remember, mental health matters. Everybody wants to